Well, after all of that, good evening and welcome to the Tom and Ruth Harkin Center. And this evening's presentation, The Heartlands at a Crossroads. Before I get into the substance of some few preliminary remarks, I do want to mention some kind of additional technical or logistical items. If you haven't found them, the restrooms are just outside this door, down the hall, kind of halfway and on your right. They are accessible to lots of different needs, so feel free to choose the one that works for you. If you have on your person right now something that's going to make a noise unexpectedly, so if you brought your toaster oven or your cell phone, now would be a good time to turn that off or put it on silence. I have learned that our discussants this evening have agreed to take audience questions after they've made a few remarks and had a little bit of a conversation between themselves at the top of the program. Yeah, it's still the top of the program. So if you are interested in asking a question, my request to you is that you kindly think about what you want to ask, like as they're talking, rather than waiting until the microphone's in your hand, so that when you do ask your question, it can be brief and it can be, how do we put it? A question. So it can be a question.
Or a monologue.
Not a monologue. This is
Only Tom Harkin gets to deliver a speech.
And we have actually slotted that right into the program. Okay, I'd like to thank some people who have been involved in making this evening's event possible. Those include Catherine Kuckelman, who is our Director of Communications, who's been in and out of this room setting up the various tech, and whose last day, I am heartbroken to say, is on Friday of this week. After that, it's smoke signals. Mindy Jones, our Director of Operations, whom most of you met on the way in. Steve Semken, the publisher at Ice Cube Press. Especially Kathy and Larry Zimpelman, who sponsored the ASL translation and the closed captioning for this evening's event. And of course, Tom and Ruth Harkin, whose work continues to inspire our work. The splendid building that bears their name is home to the Harkin Institute for Public Policy and Citizen Engagement, co-sponsor of tonight's event with Ice Cube Press. As executive director of that institute, I take great pride in our core commitments: inclusion, education, respect, accessibility, opportunity, and above all, dignity. These values are embodied in the Harkin Center itself, one of the world's most universally accessible and welcoming spaces, and they're manifest in the legacy of our namesake, retired Iowa Senator Tom Harkin. Now, this is a milestone year at the Harkin Institute. It marks 35 years since the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, of which Tom was the chief sponsor and lead author. And it marks 50 years since Tom Harkin first took his seat in Congress at the age of 11. Very prodigious time. During his time, first in the House and then in the Senate, his legislative leadership touched numerous areas, not just of American life, but of life around the world. They include agricultural policy and human rights, child labor, labor rights, education, medical research, and of course, the core areas that animate the Harkin Institute's mission: retirement and long-term care security, disability rights and disability employment, nutrition access, and human wellness, which in recent years has expanded to include environmental protection, clean water, and soil conservation. A legislative agenda alone, however, can't get to the heart of Tom Harkin's life's work, which has always been and remains decidedly about people. Not just the people he served, but the people who worked with him and for him. Many of you will already know that about him. Many of you have probably worked for him. Even so, it remains for me a great pleasure and a great honor to introduce the Honorable Tom Harkin.
Thank you. Pretty proud. Wow.
What a great turnout. Thank you very much, Craig, and thank you for being a great director of this institute. Is this, I can't hear a feedback, but it's coming through. Okay.
Yeah,
So Craig mentioned that this is the 50th year since I was first elected to Congress in the US House. But it's the 52nd year since Ruth Harkin was first elected to office. So you can see there was 2 more years there before I got elected. You can kind of figure that one out, right? So again, thank you. We're very proud of this institute and all of the things that we're doing. Tomorrow night at the same place, same time, we're having a wonderful panel discussion on disability rights issues, and it's framed around this from Washington to Iowa. What happens in Washington when they talk about cutting Medicaid and things like that? How does it affect people with disabilities and their families here in the state of Iowa or in Des Moines locally? I think you'll find it interesting. That's tomorrow night. And again, you're certainly welcome to come and join with that. I don't know if it's being streamed or not tomorrow night. I don't know about all that stuff. Anyway, my job is basically to introduce our 2 presenters tonight. First of all, Art Cullen. He's the editor and co-owner with his older brother, John, of the Storm Lake Times Pilot in Northwest Iowa. They launched it in 1990. I just said to John, I wish I had with me a copy of what's called the Progressive Populist.
yes.
Do any of you get the Progressive Populist? Yeah, okay. Well, it's a bi-monthly, am I right?
Monthly.
Monthly. Used to be bi-monthly.
Yeah.
It's monthly newspaper that John publishes. It's called the Progressive, huh?
Brother Jim publishes that.
Third brother.
Can't keep them straight. Anyway,
Like rabbits.
what?
We're like rabbits.
I know. Anyway, you could probably go online and find it, but subscribe to the Progressive Populist. It is a recap of articles written by progressive writers all over the country. Is that about the right way of saying it, John?
Populist.com.
What's it called?
Populist.com.
Populist.com.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you
Good populists.
All right. Anyway, but it's a great paper. You'd love it. It comes out like a newspaper. It's really great. Okay, Art Cullen won the Pulitzer Prize, as you all know, in 2017 for, guess what, a series of editorials about agricultural surface water pollution in Iowa. And he took on the biggest producers and the biggest polluters, and he sure deserved that, the Pulitzer Prize for that. It's his columns have appeared in all the famous newspapers all over the world. And of course, you can get him online on Substack also, which I just read his latest on that. And he authored the book Storm Lake, as you know, and it was made into a movie in 2021. Have you seen the movie? Of course, if you haven't, get it, watch it. It's a great movie and won a lot of awards in 2021. And his new book, which he's here, is We Crapped in Our Nest. Here, Marty, it's a great book. You'll love it. And again, it examines the intersections of corporate agriculture, water contamination, rural community transformation. And you can get his book out here. The publisher is Ice Cube Press, Steve Simpkins. So you can get his book out there, and I'll bet you can get him to sign it too.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So you get
Yes.
sign his book. And of course, we have Chris Jones, who is no stranger to us here, has been here a few times before. Recently was a research engineer at the University of Iowa. He first got his first degree at Simpson College, then he got his PhD in analytical chemistry from Montana State University. He has worked with the Iowa Des Moines Waterworks, the Iowa Soybean Association. He recently retired from the University of Iowa. In addition to his Substack, you can read his columns on Substack also. He has become executive director of the Iowa Driftless Water Defenders. You might decide to tell what that is. Mostly northeast Iowa, the Driftless Iowa area up in, I think of it as Decorah and that northeast Iowa area. He's the author of a book. Again, I hope a lot of you read. If you haven't, read The Swine Republic. I see if many of you read the books. The Swine is a great struggles with truth about agriculture and water quality, which dives into the science, politics, culture, and economics of Iowa agriculture, our degraded waters, and kind of connects the dots for people to follow on how all of this happens. So again, in keeping with the Institute's our goal of citizen engagement and bringing people together to discuss issues of deep concern. And I can't think of anything that's more deeply concerning to everyone in Iowa than clean water right now and what's happening to our state. And so we brought two people together that have focused on this in their writings and continue to do so for a discussion. As I understand, Chris will basically be interviewing Art. Good luck with that, Joe. and
George Burns and Gracie, right? Gracie was a straight man.
Yeah.
I'm Art's straight man.
Anyway, you're in for a great discussion on what's happening with water quality in Iowa. Thank you all for being here. Chris Jones is here.
Well, thanks, Senator, and thank you, everybody, for coming. There must not be any basketball game on TV. Well, since I wrote a book, I feel compelled to read a little excerpt out of it. I love to hear the sound of my own voice. And so you get your money's worth tonight. I'll do a short reading. The book is called Dear Marty, We Crapped in Our Nest, Notes from the Edge of the World. When you live in Northwest Iowa, you feel like it's the edge of the world. And the book kind of talks about how our urge to take dominion over the land and other people, as we interpret it from Genesis, has really led us to screw up what should be the richest place in the world. And we can't seem to make a buck out here. And if we would use our senses, it could be a different place. So I'll just do a little short reading here from just the first chapter to give you a flavor of what the book's like. It's called Chapter 1, The View from Storm Lake. It's not the end of the world, but you can see it from here. Corn and soybeans row upon row with windmills and hoghouses lining the vast horizon. Here at the eastern edge of nowhere, we talk first, as always, of weather. Storm Lake has been dry. What should be Little Storm Lake has turned into a cracked mud flat. Look west from Buffalo Ridge, the edge of what the Wisconsin Glacier bore, and you can see the wildfires in the sky and smell them. The Great Plains are on fire. The West, too. It's a millennial drought, the scientists report, the worst since the Mandan people had to flee northwest Iowa up the Missouri to the Dakotas some 1,200 years ago. The Ogallala Aquifer, slaking the nation's beef herd from Texas to Nebraska, is running dry. Storm Lake's outlet dam hasn't run all spring and summer. Minnehaha Falls in the Twin Cities no longer fall since the creek trickled away. Tractors and trucks kicked up a storm of dust. At the end of October 2022, it was 77 degrees, and you could scarcely recall the last time it rained. Sound familiar? Still, the corn came in at more than 200 bushels per acre, thanks to genetic engineering and a thin layer of topsoil laced with petrochemicals that we're flushing down the river. Down in Kansas, the corn can barely grow even with pumping from the Ogallala Aquifer. At night, you can hear it grow. You cannot hear its gasp as the wee hours turn more humid and hot. The Missouri River runs wild against our engineering and washes whole towns down with it when the gales come in June. This can't go on. The Gulf of Mexico is suffocating from those 200 bushels of corn. The Mississippi River is so full of Iowa and Illinois loam that barges can't float down to the deep south. The dirt kills the coastline too, while hurricanes intensify. You can see this cannot be sustained. Our dominion has been our undoing. It's not just the weather that got extreme, the people changed. Iowa nice went nasty. A lot of us woke up to a Tea Party revolt in 2010 and wondered what happened to the place of seeming moderation from our youth. Unlike old Rip Van Winkle, our eyes were open the entire time, but we didn't necessarily notice. You could hear it coming. For 20 years, Steve King, our congressman from Northwest Iowa, railed against immigration. He warned of a great replacement whereby brown or black people would displace whites, who displaced the native people by slaughter and starvation. We told you so, but nobody listened. That he did not expect to meet homosexuals in heaven, that European culture was better than African culture, that immigrants would drive us out of rural Iowa, as if the agribusiness cabal hadn't already finished that job. King gave voice to the frustrations of those left behind. The family farm was wheezing, if not dead. The Maytag repairmen moved from Newton, Iowa to the Maquiladora plant in Juarez. Even the wind turbine factory that replaced Maytag in Newton shut down. Mississippi River towns that were once manufacturing and processing hubs went dark, and their denizens felt like their destiny was swept down the river. You can't make it here anymore. Mexicans took your job. Black kids get a leg up in college. I'm standing here shoveling corn, making just enough to square the rent. Who's helping me? Somebody in Shanghai or San Francisco? Frustration and resentment are the spawn of consolidation and loss of what was, what is, and what shall be. We told you so. Few listened until Tripp Gabriel of the New York Times called out some of King's racist blurts in 2020. Republicans in Congress drummed him out, despite having just campaigned with him when he repeated all the same tropes, just like they do with Trump. Just like that, King was gone because he was finally noticed. He was replaced by Randy Feenstra, a Dutchman from Hull, Iowa, who scorns every step of the immigrant as much, but feeds the fear in a more palatable and less direct way. This is where the seeds were scattered. The insurrection at the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021 should have surprised no one. Insurgents had already stormed the Minnesota and Michigan capitals. Police in Minneapolis were shooting at CNN news crews following George Floyd's death in the wake of the white militia freaks trying to burn down the Twin Cities. This did not happen in New York or Los Angeles. It happened in Charlottesville, where the torch burns brightest. Who paid attention? Who'd been listening to the spleen venting? The dots were there, waiting to be connected. An editor said, "Isn't that a stereotype?" After I had written, "While the church ladies quilt and the men shoot outside, other business gets done over coffee. They do not declare victory and rest." I know men who will crawl on their bellies through frozen farm fields, stalking a Canada goose about to get blasted, and plenty of others less ambitious who just lie there, waiting for them to fly over from nearby sewage lagoons. They're real. Nearly all I know are perfectly okay with assault rifles for recreation. Then there are the church ladies. They quilt in Verina, population 68, to honor families of police and military, and they regularly welcome the embrace of Representative King, the Republican down the road in Chiron, population 321. It's not what the quilts are necessarily about, but the women generally are pro-life. They got started at St. Columbkille's Parish Hall. The church since is closed, but they keep on. Or it could be in St. Joe, where crosses were planted on the church lawn to remember the babies lost to abortion. The Kossuth County hamlet voted solid Democrat until 1990, when Republican Tom Talkie bettered Senator Tom Harkin there almost entirely over the abortion issue. They're all real people with real opinions that they share with the likes of Steve King. They vote. It's how politics gets done in these villages that might as well be on the digital opinion factory editor's mood. It is how the US Supreme Court and the Iowa Supreme Court got stacked with justices who, within a week of each other, flipped precedent into the ditch and declared there is no right to an abortion under the state or federal constitutions. Coincidence? Not. It's the culmination of a 50-year campaign to organize rural people through the church. Morton Blackwell, who helped Jerry Falwell launch the Moral Majority, described it as harvesting the last virgin timber, evangelicals. Politics starts in the pews and at the gun clubs and spreads from there. If you cannot imagine a town of 68 people, you might not be able to appreciate how things get done around here. Roe versus Wade galvanized evangelicals and Catholics, previously suspicious of each other, into a powerful political partnership that flourishes today. Iowa Right to Life has become one of the most influential outfits in Des Moines, alongside the Iowa Farm Bureau and the Association of Business and Industry. Somehow there's this disconnect of people who do not share the same experiences. Reality takes on caricature. When you look at a quilting lady as if she were a black and white photograph, you cannot see that she has deeply rooted convictions about life that are reinforced at the pulpit in the morning, at coffee in the afternoon, and on AM radio all day long. The result? In 2010, 3 Iowa Supreme Court justices were ousted when outside money funneled by Bob Vanderplots and the family leaders staged a campaign to defeat them for ruling that the state cannot discriminate against homosexuals as a class. The replacements were the ones who overturned the abortion precedent. That was the same year the US Supreme Court handed down Citizens United, corporations are people and money is speech, which opened the floodgates to unbridled purchase of our political and judicial systems. And then Heller, the right to bear arms extends to individuals. And now in Iowa, you can carry a concealed weapon into the courthouse without a permit. It also was the year of the Tea Party Revolution, funded by those groups, cultivated by Blackwell and friends, setting up Mitch McConnell and his errand boy, Chuck Grassley, to stack the courts. The cloud seeding from Virginia worked. The ground was fertile in Iowa, with its large numbers of Catholics, Missouri Synod Lutherans, and evangelicals in tiny wooden churches along blacktop roads where the political gospel was handed down. The dogma of freedom for guns was filtered through groups like the Iowa Firearms Coalition. Farmers who wanted the government off their backs bought into the theology of no regulation, while still expecting crop insurance subsidies peddled by the Farm Bureau. The network worked assiduously over the past 5 decades, building a media echo chamber, winning state house races over guns and abortion, and securing state and federal judicial systems. Now, no Democratic Iowa Senator lives west of Des Moines. That just changed when Caitlin Dray of Sioux City won election in January. Things are happening. The gun lobby took out Democratic Senate Majority Leader Mike Gronstel of Council Bluffs in 2016. The Democrats have been wandering wounded since. The Iowa Supreme Court has repeatedly bleated since 2016 that it wants nothing to do with regulating Iowa's biggest enterprise and polluter, agribusiness. Ironic that a couple weeks after the abortion rulings, the U.S. and Iowa high courts each restricted the ability of local communities to regulate pollution. Former justices and appellate attorneys have lamented to me how politicized the Iowa court has become. They're still reeling. Democrats wrote off rural believers as Bible thumpers clinging to their guns. The electoral consequences have been felt as liberty has been left to the legislative meat grinder. You could see it coming like a thunderstorm rolling in from Nebraska. You could hear it if you listen, here in the land of tall corn and quaint misimpression. So anyway, that's kind of an introduction to the book. It's a real uplifting book. It also features a friend of mine, Ron Roseman, who's in the crowd tonight, and about how he offers hope for a future through more sustainable ag practices. So there are some bright spots in the book. And thanks for coming tonight, Ron. Chris, maybe you got something to say, huh?
Well, maybe, I guess. I don't know. I guess it's working. You know, once in a while, I'm laying in bed in the morning and I read Art Substack and I'll say to Bridget here, you know, I think I'm a better writer than Art Cullen. Then a couple weeks later, I'll read it and I'll say, you know what I said a couple weeks ago about me being better than Art Cullen? No, I'm not. So just to let you know, Art, that idea has entered my head for me.
Thank you.
But I quickly
Disabuse yourself.
So anyway, yes, thanks for coming tonight. And I think a lot of people here want to hear about the condition of our water and what we can do about it. And that's something both Art and I have written about. And, you know, I heard a physician say one time, you can tell a lot from a person by looking at their skin. And if their skin looks good, generally they're in pretty good health. And the way I see it, I look at Iowa, our lakes and our rivers and our aquifers in that same way. Do they look good? No, they don't look good, right? They're sick. And I think they tell us that there's something wrong on the inside, right? That we have a malignant tumor growing on the inside. And I think what that malignant tumor is corporate agriculture. And I think that consolidation in agriculture and the way we farm these days has had effects far beyond our water. I think it's contributed greatly to the decline of rural Iowa. And so I grew up here. My folks are both from Marion County, Knoxville, southeast of here. And I can remember these small towns around Iowa when I was a kid being pretty prosperous places, right? Kind of thriving. And, you know, you drive around now and they're not, right? I mean, some endure, some look pretty good.
They just bulldozed the main street of Pomeroy. Bulldozed it.
Yeah. So, and so some hang on because they've got something special there. They're within driving distance of a bigger city, or they've got some industry that's remained in town. But so many of them have declined so badly. And we have 70 out of our 99 counties are losing population. You know, in 1950, we had 4,600 school districts in Iowa. Can you believe that? Now we have 330.
Wow.
And, you know, this is a terrible thing that's happened to our state. And why has it happened? It's because of corporate agriculture. There can be no doubt. And so can we reverse this? Can we reverse this? The water quality, the condition of our rivers, the condition of our lakes, the condition of our aquifers is merely a symptom of what has happened across rural Iowa. Okay? And it's a symptom. And we know that this system cannot be made to perform in an environmentally sound manner. We know that. If you've studied this like I have, if you've heard the same conversations that I've had in rooms with other scientists, you know, we just shake our head. What are we doing here? You know, we can't continue to try to put Band-Aids and diapers on this system and think we're going to get the environmental outcomes that we want. We're just not going to. We can't have two species covering 75% of the landscape, that being corn and soybeans, and expect to get the environmental outcomes that we want. It's not going to happen. And so we need diversity on the landscape. We need a diversity of crops, we need a diversity of economy, and we need a diversity of people. Okay? We need a change in farming. We need a change in the crops we grow. We need a change in the overall structure, and we need some changes in who farms, right? And so what do we have now? We have primarily old white men, 65 years old, that are farming. That is not a demographic that is receptive to change, right? I'm in that, right? And that's a demographic that doesn't want to change their underwear. They're not going to change. So we need some fundamental changes here in the structure of agriculture. We need that to get the environmental outcomes that we want. We need it to restore rural Iowa to something resembling what it used to be. And we need a diversity of economy across our rural areas. And so, look, we don't get the environmental outcomes that we want. And I hear all the time that farmers don't get the economic outcomes that they want. So why are we doing what we're doing? It makes no sense. And so let's talk about what we're doing, and let's talk about what we can do differently. And let's create a vision for what that different thing looks like. Let's articulate it. Let's get it down on paper. Let's talk about it. Let's reach a consensus on it. And then let's work towards that, right? And so who here in this state that's not farming wants the state to just be corn, soy, and CAFO? Nobody I talk to thinks that's a great idea. And so I think that's what we want to talk about tonight in an overview, and I'll let you respond to my remarks, Art. My thumb is killing me.
Oh, you gotta hold that down.
I think.
I just had one observation, but the biggest, the Des Moines Water Works lawsuit was a seminal moment in Iowa history, and it kind of changed the conversation of what's going on in Iowa. And it introduced most of us to the topic of nitrate, and a lot of us. And one of the big problems is fall fertilization. We've been talking about the problem of fertilizing in the fall for as long as I've been covering agriculture, in 40 years. And I drove up to Rochester, Minnesota and back, and I can't tell you how many anhydrous ammonia tanks I saw between Storm Lake, Iowa and Rochester, a 4.5-hour drive. And I could go off on a tirade about rural healthcare too, but I won't. I was in Rochester to get adequate healthcare, which you can't get in rural Iowa. And cancer is spreading in the northwest Iowa. We have the highest rates of prostate and breast cancer in North America, in the 4th Congressional District, where all those anhydrous tanks are. Hello. And then Brother John and I, John, would you please just stand up once and wave to everybody? My big brother. He's my driver. I call him James. And we about barfed on the way down here between Fort Dodge and Des Moines. It was putrid, just putrid, spreading manure, in the fall. Was Nevada, huh? Well, it was beyond, it was from Fort Dodge to Des Moines was putrid. And this is all done in the fall. They're losing 30% of the nitrogen application to water and air from this fall fertilization, and then spring flushes. And, and it's all because it's set up for one guy to run, 1,500, 2,000 acres. And so, they've got to be out there just as soon as the ground thaws. And so they're just, all of it's going to the Gulf of Mexico, and it's killing the shrimping industry down there. And they have no power like the Farm Bureau does, which runs a huge insurance company to finance its political operations. And it's all part of a very complicated web that is literally suffocating the Gulf of Mexico, and we're doing nothing about it. Nothing. The problem, the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is getting worse. That was what the Des Moines Waterworks lawsuit ultimately was all about. And it was about nitrate pollution of the Raccoon and Des Moines rivers and how it's ending up in the Gulf of Mexico and suffocating the Gulf and killing the entire fishing industry. And we have made no progress over how many years, Chris, of the voluntary nutrient reduction strategy?
Well, the nutrient strategy, 2012, and so, yeah, we've made no progress. But let's talk about fall application. So when farmers apply in the fall, guess what? That nitrogen they buy in the fall is cheaper than what they pay for it in the spring. And when they fall apply, they also apply more in the fall than what they would apply if they're applying in the spring. Why do they apply more in the fall? Because they know they're going to lose a greater percentage of it, okay? And so there's an easy fix to this. There's a real easy fix to this. You tax fall application. You put a tax on the fall fertilizer to make the price equivalent to what they would pay if they bought it in the fall. Sounds easy, right? But this is the sort of thing that our political leaders have no courage. How much courage does it take to talk about something like that? When you've got a practice that you know is polluting drinking water down here in Des Moines for 600,000 people, polluting the drinking water in Cedar Rapids, Iowa City, Manchester, Boone, Decorah, a lot of small towns across the state. When you know something as fundamental and should be as easy to fix as that, why don't we even have the courage to do that? And so that's where I say we need to rethink this whole system. The whole thing is perverse, the way we farm here. It's perverse. And so we need to rethink this. We need to get away from this 2-crop rotation. We need to reimagine what rural Iowa looks like. Ethanol. We need to get rid of ethanol. I know that there's 7,000 jobs here in Iowa that depend on ethanol. And if you have one of those jobs, it's important to you. I get that. But we have 11,000 square miles of our land that is devoted to growing corn for ethanol. Okay, we have 99 counties. Think about that. We have the area of 20 whole counties is used to just grow corn for ethanol. 11,000 square miles of the best land on earth, it produces 7,000 jobs. If I was a boss at a corporation and I went to one of my underlings and said, look, we have this 11,000 square miles and you've only produced 7,000 jobs there. That's crazy, right? We ought to produce 10 times that many jobs with that land, with that best land on earth. And so why do we do this? Why do we do this? It's because the corporations and the oligarchs have their infrastructure set up. They have their built infrastructure. They have their economic infrastructure in place, and they don't want to change. They don't want to change. And so we need to make them change. And if there's one thing I want you to take home from tonight, I would tell you that this decision to make fuel ethanol from corn here in Iowa is the worst natural resource decision that has ever been made in this country's history. I stand by that. It's polluted our water. It's polluted the Gulf of Mexico. What good has it done us from an environmental perspective? I would say none.
One other observation I have from driving across Iowa, I call it the Highway 20 vortex, from Waterloo to Sioux City. You don't see a single cow, not a single steer. Now, Ron Roseman is making money raising cattle. He works hard as organic beef, and but you can drive. He lives down near Heartland, but you can drive across Highway 20. When I was a kid, you could drive from Storm Lake to Carroll and it didn't smell putrid, it smelled sweet like money. It was that you could smell cattle grazing on green hills, couldn't you, John? We were driving Highway 71 from Storm Lake to Carroll. Those hills are all plowed up now. They're black right now, and they're spreading shit on them. And it's not cattle spreading shit, it's honey wagons. And we got to put hooves back on the ground and get things back into balance. You know, before we showed up and screwed everything up, there were herds of 500,000 elk roaming around Algona, Iowa. And we've totally upset that balance now. And so now we've replaced it with this chemical agriculture. And we need to pay attention to what farmers like Ron Roseman are doing, and Zach Smith up near Buffalo Center, who's creating a solar powered barn that goats graze on, and it moves slowly through fields. There's all sorts of ideas happening out there that can make farmers prosperous, but everything is directing them toward this agribusiness, agrochemical paradigm, and it just sucks you in, and it's very difficult to operate outside that system. We're just beginning to create those new marketing systems, and it's a real challenge when all the money is stacked against common sense agriculture that says, you know, give the land a break every 4 years, you know, rotate. And you know, it worked. It made us the richest state in the country at one time. We had the top education system. We had strong rural communities that weren't bulldozing the main street of Pomeroy. And but we took capital and replaced labor with capital. And the results are pretty evident in the kind of astonishing speed of destruction that we've enabled in Iowa since 1975. And since Tom Harkin got elected to Congress. But he was actually fighting the good fight all those years against the Farm Bureau. Did they ever endorse you? The Farm Bureau ever? One time. That must have been some mistake you made.
So Art mentions cattle. If you read my Substack, the last one I said, I think environmentalists have made a terrible mistake in focusing on this cow farts thing in terms of climate change. And so, yes, cattle do emit methane, and like all other animals. But, you know, when we look at a piece of ground and you see cattle grazing out there, what's the greenhouse gas emissions from that versus if it was in corn and soybean? Well, of course, if it's in corn and soybean, it's much higher, right? But we don't raise cattle that way anymore, right? We put them in feedlots, and we put them under these monoslope buildings, a type of indoor-outdoor confinement. And so in that circumstance, yeah, cattle, it's a bad thing. They're emitting a lot of greenhouse gas, and the manure's more difficult to handle. But we don't have these cattle on pasture anymore. Well, why don't we have cattle on pasture anymore? It's because of the renewable fuel standard, okay? We made it better off for farmers to grow corn on some of this marginal land, and so we converted this hilly land, especially in southern and western Iowa, from pasture land to row crop land, right? And so we need cattle. We need cattle back here, but we don't need them back in confinements. We need them back in these pastoral systems where we have rotation of crops, we have animals that are rotating around the field in these different things they call paddocks, where they fence them off a section of a field. We need to keep them out of streams. We can help the farmers drill wells on that land to provide watering systems for these cattle. We can help them pay for constructed shade. I don't know if you've seen these big shade apparatuses that shade cattle out in these pastures. We can do all of that. The money is available for farmers to do that, but we need to create, some economic drivers here to make that happen. It's just not going to happen by itself. And so I would urge you to think differently about cattle. Is it bad to have cattle on pasture? I'd say compared to a bunch of hogs in a confinement and a bunch of cattle on a feedlot, no, we want cattle on pasture. And so I think that's a key moving forward here in changing this agricultural system.
Anybody got any questions for us? And again, please, questions, no speeches. We're the speechifiers.
I'm gonna leave one mic with you and I'm gonna take
Great.
one around the room.
There's a shade apparatus, right?
No, they have these big umbrella sort of things that, I mean, it could be a tree. But you could buy something if you don't have any trees and don't have the patience for the tree to grow.
Thanks, gentlemen. I get what you're saying. I grew up in a town with 400 people between here and Marshalltown. That town used to be unbelievably vibrant, had everything you would need in it except a pharmacy. And now it's a pond world where you can just pile up the main street. But here's the question. To do what you're talking about, to get rid of this corn, soybeans, to change the way we deal with livestock, we're presumably gonna have to pay for it. I know lots of farmers that are good people, but they also wanna make a living. I'm assuming that we gotta create some incentives here, and we're gonna have to pay farmers not to grow as much as they have. And we're gonna have to pay farmers to let land set idle every 3 or 4 years. Is that part of the solution here?
Well, firstly, I'd say we're paying for the monstrosity that we have now, right, in a multitude of ways. But yeah, I think it's right for the public to participate in these sorts of things. And let me tell you this, we require by law every gas station in the state of Iowa to sell E15 blended gasoline, right? Every gas station in the state of Iowa does that. Well, guess what? At one time, Iowa was the #1 oat growing state in the United States. All right. I live 25 miles from the world's largest oat mill, right? And they do not use hardly any Iowa oats, right? They bring oats in by rail from Canada. Well, if we can make every gas station in the state of Iowa to sell E15 blended fuel, why can't we make Quaker Oats use some oats that are grown here in Iowa? We know that oats produce much better environmental outcomes. They can grow on marginal land. For example, that's an idea that we could pursue. And so, yes, we're going to have to help agriculture produce these different paths. We need the off-ramp, right? Farmers need the off-ramp. I think it's okay for the public to help build the off-ramp.
When Tom Vilsack was agriculture secretary, seems like a lifetime ago. He had a program called Climate Smart Agriculture, and he tried just that. Except he took the wrong approach. He said, let's give the money to Cargill and see how it trickles down to the farmer. And and it just didn't happen. You know, you just don't see cover crops in northern Iowa. You just don't. And you know, Tyson was going to be part of some environmental initiative. You know, that's hilarious. You know, just nothing happened, and they had $30 billion, and I don't know what the result of it was. It was a nice idea because he figured, well, you know, if you can co-opt Tyson and Cargill, then maybe you can change the system. And you can't change it as long as they're fighting you because they got more money than God. And so it was very difficult for the Biden administration to try and effect that change. They gave it the old college try, but what they should have done is funneled the money through the USDA directly to farmers and preferably to renters. And so they could actually get something done, but he had the right idea, that is to co-opt corporations, but you can't co-opt them because they're just too big. And so they just sucked up all the money, and I don't know where it all went.
I've got a question for Art. You know, given how many small town newspapers have closed, how have you managed to be a success?
Well, first of all, thanks to the generosity of people in this room. I get a little choked up when I think about it. We nearly went broke during the pandemic. And there was this Chinese guy who heard about us on public radio, about our documentary. And so I don't cuss out billionaires anymore. He called up and said, we couldn't make our nut and we were going to close the newspaper. And he said, I'm gonna bail you out, basically. I want to help you. And you know, there are angels and they come in the form of 83-year-old guys from China. He fled mainland China with Chiang Kai-shek, figured that the Taiwanese were as bad as the communists and had to get to the US, but he couldn't speak English, so he went to Germany to learn English as an indentured servant in a German shipyard, eventually makes it to California, and no kidding, in a garage, invents the world's next, you know, the best mousetrap. And it's the memory that's in your cell phone. He made it. This guy's name is John too. And he bailed us out. And I'm an Irish mystic. And so I prayed to St. John Bosco over this. He's the patron saint of editors and pressmen. And we needed $66,000 to make our health insurance, pay for our health insurance premiums and everything, and make it through the end of the year. And he didn't know that. And he just deposited $65,000 in our checking account one night. And, you know, we made it. And then there were other people since then who've contributed. What's happened in journalism is that our business model is completely shattered. And so we can't depend on advertising revenue anymore. And so we depend now on subscriptions and reader revenue. The New York Times, the Boston Globe, the Minneapolis Star Tribune are doing okay, living off reader revenue. I don't know that the audience is large enough in rural Iowa to live off subscriptions alone. So we've formed something called the Western Iowa Journalism Foundation that solicits donations for newspapers in rural communities. It started with Doug Burns and Lorena Lopez, who's the publisher of La Prensa in Denison, a Spanish language paper. And it's benefited the Storm Lake Times, the Carroll Times Herald, the Denison La Prensa, and the Cherokee Chronicle, the Sac Sun. And there are people in this room who've given a lot of money to it. And it's the future of journalism in rural Iowa. It's the only way these papers are going to be able to survive. Just last month, we had about a 70% reduction in our advertising revenue. Yeah, and so it's just stunning, the slides that we see in our revenue. And so I'm schlepping this book. Long answer, but I'm interested in my own story. I'm schlepping this book, and so I'm supposed to speak. There's a little bookstore in Cherokee that wants me to speak, and John and I own the Cherokee Chronicle Times, which is 22. It's next door to Storm Lake, and nobody else wants the paper, honestly, and so we took it. And so I'm supposed to speak at this bookstore, and she says, "Could you have a reporter do a story about it?" And then we'll have the radio station do a story about it. That's really exciting to me. And then she says, and then I'm going to buy an ad on Facebook. And I wanted to strangle it. You know, can't you give us just $10, you know, or a bottle of wine, you know, something. And so that's what the environment is like right now in community journalism. It's very difficult. And when there are a lot of news deserts in Iowa. You know, the Centerville Iowegian closed down. It's one of the oldest businesses in Iowa, almost as old as prostitution. And you know, Centerville has enough things working against it without a newspaper. You know, you need a newspaper. You need some sort of a medium to give people common facts and common talking points. And they're disappearing left and right. And when they do, studies at the University of Notre Dame and the University of North Carolina have shown that wasteful spending goes up, taxes go up. Look at what's happening in Iowa, double-digit increases in property taxes, and there's nobody reporting on it, except for the Storm Lake Times pilot. And hence, nothing happens at the legislature. They just ignore it. And we're getting double digit. I don't know if it's happening in Des Moines, but it's certainly happening in Storm Lake and other rural communities. And because there's nobody reporting on it. And crime goes up. There's no shaming that goes on anymore when the drunk driver gets arrested. So it's really important that we support these community institutions. And you may think it's just a drag, but it has school lunch menus in it. And people like to look at what the kids are eating. And people in the nursing home do. It reminds them that they're connected to the community. And, you know, so anyway, I could go on for 3 hours, but I'm sorry.
To quickly add a shout to two other economically sustainable ag innovators locally here, Bob Riley and Seth Watkins in Clarinda. If people aren't looking at what they're doing, please check out what they're up to as well. My question though, which I wrote down, don't worry, is it seems Republican success is built upon sort of dogma grown from a decades-long dedication to like simple rallying points that prey upon thoughtlessness in many cases. But what is the thoughtful rallying point that you believe could reverse this damaging dedication to failed philosophies underpinning really what is the thesis of your book? What's the simple thing we need to be targeting that we can rally around?
That we just, it sounds crazy, but we need to live within our means and get back to that old Iowa normal. You know, that where we govern from the center. And I know that sounds that it's an inadequate answer. It's not exactly a rallying cry. I think this cycle, this is the first time since 1968 that there's been an open Senate and an open governor's race in Iowa. And the last one was Bob Ray beat Paul Franzenberg. And then Harold Hughes beat Jack Miller? Yes. And I happen to think that people in Iowa are truly horrified by the plausible connection between water pollution and cancer. If I were Rob Sand, I would be all over that. He's not. I think that could turn an election in Iowa, but I also thought there's no way that Donald Trump was going to beat Hillary Clinton.
Well, I think, if there's an issue that's been ignored by both parties, it's the condition of our water and our condition of our environment. And, nobody wants to drink poisonous water. I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat, right? And so why Democrats? I mean, I don't think much about Republicans and, why they think the way they do. I don't spend my time on that. But it is bewildering to me why Democrats won't embrace the issue of water and the issue of environment here. And so you look at our state and look at the quality of life here. This degrades our quality of life, right? We have 130 or so lakes here in Iowa. A lot of those were constructed at taxpayer expense. We can't even use them in the summertime, right? They have these terrible algae blooms or they're polluted with E. coli. They're unusable. And we built those. And we've paid DNR to go in and restore them time after time. Lake Darling down there, Fairfield, how many times have we restored that at taxpayer expense? This is a quality of life issue, and I don't care if you're liberal or conservative, Democrat or Republican. And so why our politicians don't see this as an opportunity is bewildering to me, to say the least.
Chris, I appreciate your notion about creating a vision
for Iowa, which would encompass so many things because they're all interrelated. So my question is, how do we make that happen? Meaning, what's the strategies to engage people and everyone to create such a thing? And is that even possible? Thank you.
Yeah, is it possible is a reasonable question here after you've had this same system entrenched for basically 50 years. But, there's a lot, as I said earlier, there's a lot of dissatisfaction with the quality of life here. I mean, you don't have to look far to see it and to find it. And so I think there's a lot of a lot of smart people and a lot of engaged people that are anxious to help and eager to help create this vision. And so I think the vision has to include, as I said before, some off-ramps for farmers. And so farmers rightly say that they're pigeonholed into this system, right? They feel like they have these handcuffs, the golden handcuffs maybe, but they're handcuffs. And it's hard to get out of them onto something else. And so we need to create off-ramps for farmers, and the ones that don't want to get off, if they want to stay on the fast lane, so to speak, we're going to regulate the hell out of them, okay? And we could say, okay, if you want to keep doing corn and soybean, fine, but look, what you do affects everybody. What a farmer does affects everybody. And if what you do affects everybody, then everybody should have a say in what you do. And part of that is regulating the inputs like nitrogen. We talked about the fall application. We ought to be able to we can determine how many livestock watershed can handle and still produce adequate water quality at the outlet of the watershed. We have the capacity to do that. We know how to do that. And so why don't we do that? How much political courage does it take to say, oh, look, this watershed shouldn't have 1 million hogs. Maybe it should only have 300,000. I mean, how courageous do you have to be to say that? And so I think we have to really cross some lines here and get rid of some of these taboos about what we can talk about and what we can't talk about, and create a consensus here, or something resembling a consensus about what we want Iowa to look like. Iowa has had 3 million people for a long time now, right? Probably 30, 40, 50 years going on. I mean, think about this. In 1960, Iowa had as many electoral votes as Florida. That is no kid. We did. And so we've stayed at this same population as the rest of the country has grown. Well, what has that done to our power in Washington, right? It's diminished us. And so we want our state to grow. We want our state to grow. We need young people to stay here. I have 3 adult children. One of them lives in California. 2 of them live in Colorado, right? They got the hell out of here. They don't want to live here. And I'm guessing many of you have the same story just like that. That needs to change. And so we need something different here. And we need to be able to talk about these things openly.
I'd just like to add that John and I were having a conversation with my son, who's our managing editor, and he would love nothing more than to get the hell out of Iowa. And we can't hang on to my own son. And so it just reinforces what Chris was saying. And he said, I want out of here. What are we supposed to do? Because when I had a 50th year class reunion, I know I don't look that old, but and these friends of mine that grew up on livestock farms, they walked out of the cobblestone ballroom and said, "My God, it just reeks in Storm Lake. It stinks," and that it didn't in 1975, and so. What is it that is going to keep young people here?
Well, first of all, thank you for everything you've done over the years. I'd like to see you talk more about the politics and the political and the agricultural policies, because Democrats are to blame nationally for embracing corporate agriculture just about as much as Republicans. As we become urbanized and because they've been able to be influenced by corporate lobbying, of course. So where's the state Democratic Party tonight? Do they buy into everything? There's less and less of us that remember what life was like in 1960 or 1955. And when we have a whole different system. So where, is the national PNC embracing every state on water quality and where the food comes from and the cancer, everything you guys have talked about? I think if we're going to make some progress, we got to do that. We got to get people elected that think these things are important. I'm convinced there's a lot of Republican farmers. There's a lot of pissed off people out there. They don't like it the way it is. They just don't talk about it because there's no other. They think it's impossible to change this system. I've talked to so many farmers that believe that way. So the other thing is consumers. Where's the consumer? We need these local and regional food systems with food manufacturing plants right here in Iowa and in rural states to add, to do the processing here and to get corporations educated that bigger is not always better. They can be very efficient with smaller scale models. And then the last thing is social media. How do we, some farmers and people that have gotten to a lot of people with what they do every day on the farm. They have educated a lot of people. That's another thing is how do you educate people and a lot of stuff there.
The first thing I would say to Democrats is you've got to drop this stupid moronic rhetoric that's promoted by the ag advocacy groups, especially a Farm Bureau. And so the main one of those is we feed the world, right? We don't even feed Polk County, right? And so we need politicians on the Democratic side to drop this stupid rhetoric. It's just maddening. It plays into the entrenchment of the system. And so I would say that's an easy first step that we need the Democratic Party to take. I had something else I wanted to say, but I forgot it. I'm sorry.
We can relate.
Yeah.
Well, I think first of all, Democrats have to get off their asses and get out into rural communities. And okay, because I won a Pulitzer Prize, like politicians call me and they say, we're on our way from Sioux City to Waterloo and we'd like to stop by and talk to you. Well, why don't you talk to 3,000 Latinos who live in Storm Lake? What are you talking to me for? They don't hold rallies in Storm Lake, and Storm Lake voted for Tom Harkin every time he ran. Tom Harkin carried Buena Vista County. Really, that's the truth. And Berkeley Bedell did too. And
Your lake drained.
yeah. Other politicians were talking about the many uses of corn, and Tom Harkin said, we're going to dredge your lake, and he carried Buena Vista County. So it tells you the power of water. That's a true story. He was standing beside another politician who was talking about the many uses of corn, and Tom Harkin said, well, corn's fine, but we're going to dredge your lake. And that's all Storm Lake needed to hear. But they showed up. They don't show up now. They fly over us. They've abandoned the Iowa caucuses. So you're getting your ass kicked in rural America. What's the first thing you do? Abandon the Iowa caucuses. Good idea. So there isn't a whole lot And if Rob Sand doesn't want us to come out and stand up for water quality and talk about how there's a putrid smell wafting over the state, then why bother? You might as well vote for Randy Feenstra. It's the same result. It's the same result because we've been asking, where's your water quality plan? I'm learning. Hell, you're from Decorah. You know, you ought to know. Why are we putting up with it? Why do we let Rob Sand get away with it?
Okay, we're gonna have three more questions, one here. Okay, one in front, and then Mike will get you a question.
Women.
You just want to read it? Okay, I'll read it right after this.
Finally, the only woman. Mentioned that, corporate act's responsible for the lack of diversity in our cropland, but what I've observed after years working with farmers is that when your average age is 65, you want to get out of livestock raising, you don't want them on pasture because it's labor intensive. How do you fight that, I guess? How do you solve that problem?
So, and I always say, I'm glad you asked that question because, I say this wherever I go that, you know, I say this at risk of sounding like a communist, but we need land reform, right? We need land reform. And so land is so expensive here, right? And so young farmers have no opportunity to get into the occupation because they can't get their hands on land. Why can't they get their hands on land? Because it costs $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 an acre. Why does land cost $25,000 an acre? It's because of the renewable fuel standard. Okay, if you look at the price of an acre of Iowa farmland, it goes in lockstep with the amount of fuel ethanol that's produced in this country. And so we created this guaranteed market for corn, right? And when we did that, we made the value of the capital increase, right? It's just simple economics. And so we need to get rid of the renewable fuel standard. The other thing that is a big problem here in Iowa, and it's a big problem in other states, is we have more than half of the land is owned by people that are not farming it. And so, look, we know if you own a rental property, the people that are living there are not going to take care of it like it was their own, right? And we know when a farmer is farming rented land, he's not, or she is not going to look at conservation in the same context as if that person owns the land. And so how can we get these landlords to divest themselves of this land? We have people sitting in offices in Minneapolis and Chicago and Omaha that own farmland. They want to return on their land, right? And so the farmer's going to farm in that way. Well, the way we do it is we regulate the pollution, right? We can look at a piece of land, and if that land's being rented, we can regulate the pollution on that land. And so we could say, for example, all rented land has to have cover crops, right? Or whatever you want to say about that land. You can't do fall application, or you can't do mold or plow or whatever. It's not that hard. And so before it was, I think Ron said a lot of farmers believe we can't change. I think that's wrong. I think that's wrong because the system, when we look out at this system, that system is there for a reason. It's there because of policy. We created it. We created this behemoth of an ethanol industry through policy. And so because we created all this through policy, we ought to be able to create something different and something better through policy if we only had some political leaders that had the courage to do that.
You know, a farm crisis coming on, and I'm wondering if the solution is to get the farmers together who basically are losing their shirts because of this administration, and also the young farmers who can't buy land, and and see what they can come up with in terms of power. I mean, this is going to take power, not just money.
And they'd.
Yeah, there was something called the National Farmers Organization. And that's exactly what they were talking about from the 1950s through the 1980s. And I don't know, does the NFO even exist anymore? Is it?
I don't think so.
Yeah, but that's exactly what the NFO was talking. But how do you herd frogs?
I don't know, but if they're mad enough.
Yeah, we've got the Iowa Farmers Union. It's a great organization. They're just golden people. They're tremendous people. And they're just dwarfed by the Farm Bureau and all its insurance company profits and investment profits. And the power of propaganda is very real. And so the Farm Bureau has its own newspaper, its own radio shows. It's just Clear Channel, Fox News, cranking it out all day long on AM radio, and it's just really tough to battle. And I had a father-in-law who was an NFO member, National Farmers Organization member, back when they were shooting hogs in ditches and dumping milk. And he got to, when he was older, he got to watching Fox News so much he was starting to badmouth Mexicans. So how this guy had gone from an NFO stalwart to somebody badmouthing Mexicans, totally the power of propaganda. And it just affected his mind. And that's what we're up against. And I don't know how you organize farmers to pursue their common interest. We've been trying that for a long time. And the Grange, these farm organizations, ever since they laid the railroad, farmers have been trying to organize themselves against power, and they always lose. And that's the other funny one now. Trump says he's going to investigate the beef industry. Ha! 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 That's a good one.
So I know there's this narrative out there that farmers are losing their shirts, but there was just a news story came out this week, I think, said the American farmer is going to make more money in 2025 than they made in 2024. And the reason for that is their payments from the government are going to be over 40% in 2025. And so as much as I dislike Tom Vilsack, which is a lot, I will say that during the Biden administration, farm income from the government was only 12%. Okay, during the first Trump administration, farm income from the government was over 40%. And so I think here there's something to be learned from that, right? And maybe all these farm programs are maybe a little counterproductive, right? To get the economic and social outcomes that we want. And so, one of the things about reimagining what Iowa should look like is we need to reimagine what farm programs look like. And so maybe a subsidized crop insurance isn't the best way to go on stuff, right?
We can't even pass a farm bill.
Yeah, that's right. So we need to reimagine how we help farmers.
Okay, one more question, which I have written down in front of me. Make the connection, if you would, please, between the issues that you're talking about and the lack of public lands in Iowa.
So I've written about this a lot, and the culture here in Iowa is one of exploitation. And so, you go to the surrounding states, Minnesota, for example, has a lot of public land, but also, some real conservative states like South Dakota, Nebraska, and Missouri all have large tracts of public land. Arkansas, not exactly a liberal stronghold, right, has a lot of public land. And so the culture in those states were different when they were settled by Europeans. And the culture here was exploitation. And so we need a change in our mindset here about our natural resources. And so yes, we need more public land. And this is one thing that also bewilders me about Democrats. Why, oh, why do no Democrats run on a platform of more parks, right? During COVID, I like camping. I would go to these state parks. They were crammed, right? You couldn't even get in. You couldn't get a campsite.
Seemed to work for Neil Smith.
Yeah, they were so full. And so how hard is it to just say that, more parks, we need more parks. We have, about 2% of our land is in public hands, and here's something a lot of people don't know, is about half of that is in road easements. Right? We have so many roads in Iowa. We have a very high density of roads in Iowa because of a farm state. A lot of our public land is in road easements. So yes, we need politicians to embrace this idea.
That's pretty.
All right.
Gentlemen, one quick question. Are you going to keep this show on the road? And if folks want to hear more of this and engage in more Q&A, will they be able to find you around Iowa doing more of this?
If you'll invite us back.
All right.
Yeah, actually, we are, I would like to make one plug. We have been, Chris, actually, we interviewed Chris for a series of documentaries we're doing with a guy by the name of Jerry Rishus, a cinematographer who toured with Anthony Bourdain, toured the world, and we're doing a series of video documentaries on Iowa issues before the 2026 midterm elections. And we're trying to, the Western Iowa Journalism Foundation is trying to raise money to finish this video series. The first one's on water, featuring Chris Jones. The second one is on cancer, featuring me. The third one is on sustainable agriculture, and then the fourth is on rural consolidation. And funny, none of the big issues facing Iowa involve what kind of underwear you're wearing or what bathroom you're using. And these are real issues, and we'd appreciate any support you could give us. And yeah, we are going to be taking that show around to every vote. We're going to email it to every inactive voter in Iowa.